There is an ancient Indian saying that something lives only as long as the last person who remembers it. My people have come to trust memory over history. While history serves only those who seek to control it, those who would douse the flame of memory in order to put out the dangerous fire of truth. Beware these men, for they are dangerous themselves and unwise.
Hidden deep beneath the canyon walls of the New Mexico desert lies a mysterious ancient city, a place of magic rituals, astronomical alignments, and supernatural legends. This massive city was lost for centuries when its occupants seemingly vanished overnight, nearly 1,000 years ago. To this day, archaeologists and historians are unable to piece together exactly what happened here. So we traveled into the ruins looking for any clues that will help us understand the true history of the canyon. What we soon would discover is a history far more shocking than anyone can believe. So join us for a unique look into Chaco Canyon, home of the Ancient Ones.
The Anasazi were an ancient culture that lived in the Colorado Plateau. No one knows why they built their fortified cities, but we do know that their entire civilization ended suddenly when they abandoned their homes. Some have speculated that the nature spirits worshipped by the Anasazi became destructive demons when the community ceased to maintain their sacred laws. These beings terrorized the population, often appearing to children before taking them away forever.
The ancient Anasazi people had superior knowledge of mathematics, astronomy, ritual magic, and some claim they also possessed supernatural abilities.
During research for our best-selling book, On the Path of the Immortals, I was given the unprecedented opportunity, really, to sit down with and to film Dr. Don Mose Jr., a third-generation medicine man who I met with for a large part of the day during our investigation, and he told me the oldest legends of the Anasazi, which he had been told by his great-grandfather, who likewise had been told by his ancestors, which included stories of the Anasazi turning to sorcery, to sacrifice, cannibalism, after they had lost their way and were driven insane by a reptilian creature, which they depict with a halo above his head, of all things. Images of that being are, by the way, included in the petroglyphs. And I believe that they likely attest to the fallen reptile or reptiles of biblical fame, which also misled humanity. He began drawing in the sand on the floor and reciting the first part of the story of the ancient Anasazi and how it had been repeated to him by his father and grandfather, who had also been told by their ancestors and so on, a legend that Dr. Mose alone had undoubtedly repeated hundreds of times before at the Navajo school. Now, since it was obvious to us that this Navajo historian was really indifferent to our camera and our recording plans, and in fact I could tell he was really uncomfortable with us putting him on film, but thankfully he let us proceed nevertheless. But I sat there and listened respectfully as he proceeded for nearly 2 hours to describe to this white man what's only ever been allowed a few times in history before, and that is the legendary stories of creation, of giants, of a great flood, of a reptilian deceiver, all from the voice of the nation's top medicine man. Dr. Mose even sang to us in the antiquated tongue of what I would call Old Testament history, paralleled in their earliest antiquity using the Navajo language.
For centuries, tribal elders have been telling stories of unbelievable supernatural events that occurred in the canyon. Events so shocking, the Ancient Ones carved pictures depicting these events into the canyon walls as a semi-permanent record of what happened here. The 15-mile-long canyon is home to over a dozen large complexes. The largest, named Pueblo Bonito, has over 800 rooms and sections that were over 5 stories tall. Tucked away on a cliff face, hidden behind Pueblo Bonito, lies one of the canyon's most telling secrets. 3 feet carved into the mountainside with 6 toes each. Are these 6-toed carvings showing the feet of a Nephilim giant depicted in the Bible? From the Book of Chronicles, chapter 20, verse 6, quote, "And yet again there was war with Gath, where was a man of great stature, whose fingers and toes were 24, 6 on each hand and 6 on each foot, and he was also the son of a giant." Legends from all over the American Southwest speak of giants, 6-fingered, red-haired giants that used to terrorize these people. They speak of evil, cannibalistic giants that would terrorize the tribes with their hunger for human flesh. These giants are said to have inhabited these areas for thousands of years. Not only do they speak of giants, however, they also mention monstrous creatures that were summoned into the canyon. These creatures were carved into the canyon walls for everyone to see.
Not only did Dr. Mose substantiate the age-old and globally recorded story of those who come through portals and the impact that they have had on biblical and global history, past and present, not only did he weave Navajo Indian myths and legends seamlessly with our understanding of the 6 days of creation, the arrival of the Nephilim, and their connection to judgment by a global flood, followed by the repopulating of people around the world, and then a second incursion of the giants. But there were several instances in which, when I pushed Dr. Mose for greater detail, he would go off script, actually delineating from the official Navajo storyline to provide greater consistency between history and the way the Bible itself recorded certain events. For example, as Mose was following the official storyline, the one that you would get from the Parks Department in the 4 corners of the U.S., about how the Anasazi didn't disappear, but rather they slowly migrated out of the area and became the modern Pueblo Indians, I expressed doubts to Dr. Mose about that story. And he responded by grinning just a little bit and saying, "Well, I probably shouldn't tell you this, but," and then he proceeded to tell us the older stories that his grandfather had repeated about these mysterious people actually disappearing after they came under mind control from a reptile with a halo, this carnivorous creature, suspiciously similar to what I later described in the Path of the Immortals book as fiery seraphim, which comes from the Hebrew seraph, the Hebrew Old Testament fiery serpent.
All throughout Chaco Canyon are these massive circular structures called kivas. The kivas are perfect circles that are built into the earth for the purpose of magic rituals, ceremonies, and religious practices. They were used extensively by the Anasazi, who, according to their own verbal history, used the kivas to summon monstrous creatures into this dimension.
Now, another case in point is when I told Dr. Mose what we had learned from the Apache about cannibalistic giants and then God destroying them in a flood. And he looks right into the camera and he says, "Oh, yes." And then he reaches over and he picks up this illustrated book that he had authored that's used in the Navajo Nation schools and libraries. And he opened to show us an artist depiction of a giant that had stood between 30 and 40 feet tall. And then he starts saying there was this time when the earth was infested with such great giants and alien gods that came down and destroyed and ate the people. Some of them were in human form. Others, he said, were monsters like human-animal hybrids, which I think the Old Testament also describes. And then he followed that story with the famous Navajo legend of the White Shell Woman, who gave birth to 2 of the most important characters in Navajo mythology, the twin miracle-performing sons, one of whose names literally translates slayer of alien gods, and his twin brother. And together, those two great warriors, killed many of the giants, hybrids, and the monsters that were destroying mankind. As Dr. Mose described these ancient tales, I couldn't help but think of David killing Goliath, and then later other giants with his mighty men. Then there was a point where Mose paused, and he said, you know, when the Christian missionaries first came to America and told our people their stories of the giants and the great flood, he said, we smiled and let them know that we already knew these stories, that they had been told to us long ago by our own ancestors.
We know that the ancient ones used petroglyphs in order to document their history and events that happened to them. Petroglyphs like this, the spiral. The spiral is found over and over again in almost every ancient culture worldwide. The spiral symbol can be found from the jungles of Peru to the frozen tundras of Siberia. The spiral can be seen as a symbol of a portal, an interdimensional portal used by entities as a transport between worlds. This is evident by the petroglyphs and the stories they tell. Now, let's take a look at some of the petroglyphs we found during our exploration of Chaco Canyon. What we see here are depictions of supernatural creatures coming directly out of the spiral and manifesting themselves in our reality. Over and over again, we see the same imagery carved into the walls. Literal monsters emerging from these spirals, and oftentimes you can see they are still connected to the spiral, and other times they're standing right next to it. You also see images of humans getting sucked into the spiral upside down, and on the other side emerges a monster. This is a common theme throughout the canyon, and these depictions can be found at numerous petroglyph sites in Chaco Canyon, and they all seem to be telling us the same exact story. During our investigation of the canyon, we came across several interesting petroglyphs, depictions of monsters, dragons, gray aliens, and weird-looking beings. But I never found what I was looking for. We searched the entire park for the 6-toed footprints of the Nephilim Giants. These footprints have been documented numerous times by mainstream publications, yet they're nowhere to be found. I started to wonder, maybe they're hiding the footprints. So I decided to stop a park ranger and ask him. The conversation went a little bit like this. "Oh, excuse me, sir. Can I ask you a quick question?" And the ranger replies, "Yes, absolutely. What can I help you find?" "I'm looking for these 6-toed footprints that were carved in the canyon wall behind Casa Bonita. Do you know where those are?" The ranger says, "Ah, yes, those footprints. They're located in an off-limits area. Unfortunately, we closed it off to the public." Closed to the public. Makes you wonder what else they have closed off to the public. And as we were about to leave the park, we decided to go and watch the 30-minute video inside the visitor center. And what we saw was shocking. They showed us petroglyphs from inside the park like no other we have ever seen. Perfectly clear images of interdimensional beings with pyramids stacked on top of their head. We walked through the entire park and did not see these petroglyphs. So it made me wonder, where are these petroglyphs and what else are they hiding from us? In 1999, an anthropologist working for the University of Utah published a book entitled Man-Corn: Cannibalism and Violence in the Prehistoric American Southwest. The term man-corn is the literal translation of the Aztec word tiactalui, which refers to a, quote, sacred meal of sacrificed human meat cooked with corn. In Turner's book, they provide evidence of cannibalism in 72 ancient Anasazi sites, including Chaco Canyon. Forensic evaluations of bones found at these sites proves they were cannibalized. But the question is by whom? Who were eating the Anasazi? After the collapse of Chaco Canyon, around 1150 AD, the remaining members of the Anasazi spread out and separated. They moved deep into remote canyons and started building their new dwellings high up on cliff faces or on highly fortified mesas. To archaeologists, it's as if the Anasazi were overtaken by some strange paranoia, hiding from some terrible enemy, but no matter how hard they looked, no enemy was found. Or was it?
And keeping in mind that these legends materialized globally at approximately the same time, it's more likely than not, in my opinion, that the universal story agrees with the record of every major culture of the ancient world in which the astonishingly consistent story is told of gods that descended from heaven and or came through spiral vortices to materialize in bodies of flesh. From Rome to Greece, and before that to Egypt, Persia, Assyria, Babylonia, Sumer, the earliest records of civilization tell of the era when powerful beings known to the Hebrews as watchers, and in the book of Genesis as the Bnei Ha-Elohim, the sons of God, mingled themselves with humans, giving birth to part celestial, part terrestrial hybrids known as Nephilim. The Bible says this happened when men began to increase on earth and daughters were born to them, when the sons of God saw the women's beauty, and they took wives from among them to sire their unusual offspring. I believe a record of this first incursion of hybrid humans and six-toed giants is recorded in Genesis 6:4, when it says there were giants in the earth in those days. That's the first incursion before the flood. And also after that is after the flood, the second incursion, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, and they bare children to them. The same became mighty men which were of old, men of renown. The universal story agrees with the record of every major culture of the ancient world, in which the astonishingly consistent story is told of gods that descended from heaven and or came through spiral vortices to materialize in bodies of flesh. From Rome to Greece, and before that to Egypt, Persia, Assyria, Babylonia, Sumer, the earliest records of civilization tell of the era when powerful beings known to the Hebrews as watchers, and in the book of Genesis as the Bnei Ha-Elohim, the sons of God, mingled themselves with humans, giving birth to part celestial, part terrestrial hybrids known as Nephilim. The Bible says this happened when men began to increase on earth and daughters were born to them, when the sons of God saw the women's beauty, and they took wives from among them to sire their unusual offspring. I believe a record of this is recorded in Genesis 6:4, when it says there were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, and they bare children to them. The same became mighty men which were of old, men of renown. This is Dr. Thomas Horn, and you are watching End Times Productions.
What's beneath us?
The ancient ones, the gods that used to rule the earth.
During research for our best-selling book, On the Path of the Immortals, I was given the unprecedented opportunity, really, to sit down with and to film Dr. Don Mose Jr., a third-generation medicine man who I met with for a large part of a day, and he told me the oldest legends of the Anasazi, which he had been told by his great-grandfather, who likewise had been told by his ancestors, which included stories of the Anasazi turning to sorcery, to sacrifice, cannibalism, after they had lost their way and were driven insane by a reptilian creature, which they depict with a halo above his head, of all things. Images of that being are, by the way, included in the petroglyphs that we filmed inside the canyons, and I believe that they likely attest to the fallen reptile or reptiles of biblical fame, which also misled humanity. As I said in the traditional Hogan at one of the Navajo schools Dr. Don Mose teaches at, he began drawing in the sand on the floor and reciting the first part of the story of the ancient Anasazi and how it had been repeated to him by his father and grandfather, who had also been told by their ancestors and so on, a legend that Dr. Mose alone had undoubtedly repeated hundreds of times before at the Navajo school. Now, since it was obvious to us that this Navajo historian was really indifferent to our camera and our recording plans, and in fact I could tell he was really uncomfortable with us putting him on film, but thankfully he let us proceed nevertheless. But I sat there and listened respectfully as he proceeded for nearly 2 hours to describe to this white man what's only ever been allowed a few times in history before, and that is the legendary stories of creation, of giants, of a great flood, of a reptilian deceiver, all from the voice of the nation's top medicine man. Dr. Mose even sang to us in the antiquated tongue of what I would call Old Testament history, paralleled in their earliest antiquity using the Navajo language. Now, not only did Dr. Mose substantiate the age-old and globally recorded story of those who come through portals and the impact that they have had on biblical and global history, past and present, not only did he weave Navajo Indian myths and legends seamlessly with our understanding of the 6 days of creation, the arrival of the Nephilim, and their connection to judgment by a global flood, followed by the repopulating of people around the world, and then a second incursion of the giants. But there were several instances in which, when I pushed Dr. Mose for greater detail, he would go off script, actually delineating from the official Navajo storyline to provide greater consistency between history and the way the Bible itself recorded certain events.
This is part of a ritual.
A ritual sacrifice?
As Mose was following the official storyline, the one that you would get from the Parks Department in the four corners of the U.S., about how the Anasazi didn't disappear, but rather they slowly migrated out of the area and became the modern Pueblo Indians, I expressed doubts to Dr. Mose about that story. And he responded by grinning just a little bit and saying, well, I probably shouldn't tell you this, but, and then he proceeded to tell us the older stories that his grandfather had repeated about these mysterious people actually disappearing after they came under mind control from a reptile with a halo, this carnivorous creature, suspiciously similar to what I later described in the Path of the Immortals book as fiery seraphim, which comes from the Hebrew seraph, the Hebrew Old Testament, fiery serpent, which also corresponds with a lot of other testaments around the ancient world, including the Sanskrit sarpa or sarpin, which means reptile, and so on. Now, another case in point is when I told Dr. Mose what we had learned from the Apache about cannibalistic giants and then God destroying them in a flood. And he looks right into the camera and he says, oh yes. And then he reaches over and he picks up this illustrated book that he had authored that's used in the Navajo Nation schools and libraries. And he opened to show us an artist depiction of a giant that had stood between 30 and 40 feet tall. And then he starts saying there was this time when the earth was infested with such great giants and alien gods that came down and destroyed and ate the people. Some of them were in human form. Others, he said, were monsters like human-animal hybrids, which I think the Old Testament also describes. And then he followed that story with the famous Navajo legend of the White Shell Woman, who gave birth to two of the most important characters in Navajo mythology, the twin miracle-performing sons, one of whose names literally translates slayer of alien gods, and his twin brother. And together, those two great warriors killed many of the giants, hybrids, and the monsters that were destroying mankind. As Dr. Mose described these ancient tales, I couldn't help but think of David killing Goliath, and then later other giants with his mighty men. Then there was a point where Mose paused, and he said, you know, when the Christian missionaries first came to America and told our people their stories of the giants and the great flood, He said, we smiled and let them know that we already knew these stories, that they had been told to us long ago by our own ancestors. After a week on the road, having covered hundreds of miles of reservations to walk amidst their multiple ruins, including hogans, temples, kivas, to follow guides and visit with a medicine man, not to mention tracking down and photographing petroglyphs, we were finally on our way to the last site that we were going to visit, one that our Cherokee guide had told us not to miss. We already collected enough pictogram and logogram images from ancient rock engravings throughout the Four Corners area to make our case and to calculate for our purposes a recurring theme, which definitely seemed to match the Middle Eastern and biblical stories of portals, reptilians, fallen angels, giants, and the havoc that those creatures had played on the old world. But this final petroglyph that was important, our guide had said, and one that we could drive right up to. So we decided to make one final excursion, this time into Utah, 50 miles north of Moab, where one of the largest known collections of petroglyphs is located in the San Juan County. This storyboard that we would visit there was etched in sandstone as early as 1,000 years before Christ, and it records practically every element contained in the Bible and extra-biblical texts involving spiral vortices and those who come through them, including human-animal chimeras and even giant six-fingered and six-toed footprints in pursuit of much smaller five-fingered and five-toed humans. Even that reptilian that Dr. Don Mose had described to us with its halo was drawn there, just a couple of feet away from the alien-looking bug-eyed creatures. This location is also easier to get to than most of the ones that we trekked to, yet it's as important, if not more so, than any petroglyphs. You could spend days hiking over miles of rough terrain to reach. It's called the Newspaper Rock Petroglyph, and is somewhat decipherable as to which images are older due to the fading and darkness of the earlier depictions, which are certainly the most mysterious with their alien-looking creatures and suits and what might even be some type of a flying craft. And archaeologists believe the writing on this Great Wall continued from 1,000 years before Christ or earlier up until about AD 1300, the same time that the Anasazi suddenly disappeared. The Anasazi used images and symbols similar to those found globally that connect to a first and second incursion of giants and the mountainous gateways that those creators came through. Now, that being true, if you take only the images that the Anasazi left behind and compare them to similar, in some cases identical, universal symbols found elsewhere around the world where the stories and meanings of the images have been made clear, and keeping in mind that these legends materialized globally at approximately the same time, when the Torah, that is Genesis through Deuteronomy, the first 5 books of the Bible, was written around BC 1300, this would have been the same time when archaeologists believe the Anasazi across the world from these Bible lands were drawing giant six-toed footprints on a slab wall in Utah and facing an alien enemy, as the name Anasazi implies. When the writings in the Torah are compared with other ancient texts, including Enoch, Jubilees, Baruch, Genesis Apocryphon, Philo, Josephus, Jasher, Jubilees, and many others, not counting the accounts of the American Indian tribes on this side of the world, it's clear that this is more than a legend. It is history. It's a chronicle told through different people's methods and worldviews involving giants suddenly infesting the entire world and then being wiped out in a flood. then somehow returning in a second incursion. This story was written down globally, from Hebrew scrolls to Indian petroglyphs, to provide the oldest recorded testament of part human, part angelic creatures who were in turn the offspring of hideous reptilian entities, or what the apocryphal Book of Enoch calls fallen watchers. In the beginning, the great Creator made everything. Then powerful reptilians came down from heaven through portals, the spiral, halo, and reptilian symbols that we found in the petroglyphs. They came to deceive the world, as Dr. Don Mose told us, and the world fell into darkness. This is also hinted in one of the meanings of the word anasaze, which can literally be translated, according to the experts that we discuss this with, as an alien enemy. Portals, represented in ancient spiral symbolism besides giant six-toed footprints and horned humanoid figures, opened at this time, and alien gods or monsters and giants came through them. Some of these giants had 6 fingers and 6 toes, just as described in the Old Testament. Then the Creator destroyed the monsters and giants in a great flood. And yet the giants and reptilian deceivers returned. They turned to sorcery, to cannibalism, and human sacrifice. Mount Graham is considered one of the 4 holiest mountains in the world for the Apache, and is considered sacred to all of the region's native peoples, and it is so because it is what we might call a stargate. In their mythos, a portal through which the star people have come since the dawn of time. There's a dragon with the power of speech that turns up, bargaining with mankind, as well as supernatural gateways associated with mountains through which spirit beings have and can come. This is Dr. Thomas Horn, and you are watching End Times Productions. This was something that we heard about and then we investigated during research for the book Exo-Vaticana, which ultimately led us to the top of Mount Graham in Arizona. We were curious why. When the Vatican's Advanced Technology Telescope and the Large Binocular Telescope were being built, why did the indigenous peoples of Arizona, especially the San Carlos Apaches, why did they join environmentalists in filing dozens of lawsuits before a federal appeals court to try to stop the construction of the observations on Mount Graham? The project ultimately prevailed in favor of the Vatican and NASA after an act by the United States Congress ordered it to be done. But the question remained in our mind, why had the tribal communities fought so diligently against the construction of telescopes atop that mountain? Now, I had wrongly assumed that this was because Mount Graham was a sacred place, as in preceding generations of Native Americans had lived and died on it, and therefore it was considered holy ground, something like a graveyard. But I learned later that while that was partially true, it really wasn't the big issue. The real dispute surrounded how Mount Graham is considered one of the 4 holiest mountains in the world for the Apache, and is considered sacred to all of the region's native peoples, and it is so because it is what we might call a stargate. In their mythos, a portal through which the star people have come since the dawn of time. And once we understood that fact, our suspicions as to why the Vatican and NASA had chosen that mountain in particular, even being willing to face a prolonged legal battle to build these telescopes on Mount Graham, including the largest binocular telescope in the world where the Lucifer device is kept, why would they have gone to all of that trouble? Why not just go to another mountain range and find basically the same height, the same environmental conditions? Why did it have to be that mountain? Now, we came to learn another thing, and that is that the San Carlos Apache have these preserved ancient tales concerning Mount Graham and that geography, including stories very similar to biblical chronology. These legends involve a creator, a deceiving dragon that follows, an epic flood, and even a race of giants known as the Jindupids, who were judged and destroyed by God. According to the legend, a race of Indians called the Tartans lived in the valley between Tucson and Phoenix. These were just peaceful farmers, and they prospered until one day they were invaded by the Jindupids, described as Goliaths, who were so huge they used tree limbs for toothpicks. Well, these Nephilim were led by this massive man they call Evil Ken, who allegedly came from the northeast and were headed south to their home beyond the Gulf of Baja. These giants nearly wiped out the Tartans before they ran and hid themselves underground and in the mountains and prayed to Father Sun, who then threw this huge fireball that came down to the earth, seared the monstrous Nephilim into the scorched mountain rock, and wiped them out. Now, elements of that tale are obviously mythological, but it has a remarkable thematic coherence with Genesis chapter 6. The Apache creation myth is also interesting in this regard, as a particular version involves what they call the one who lives above, who descended down over the mountain in a flying disc at the start of creation. Their myth begins, in the beginning, nothing existed, no earth, no sky, no sun, no moon, only darkness was everywhere. And then the legend starts, before noting that suddenly from the darkness emerged a disc. One side of it was yellow, the other side of it was white. It appeared suspended in midair, and within the disc sat a bearded man, the creator, the one who lives above. Now, besides this creator who rides in a heavenly disc, there's a dragon with the power of speech that turns up, bargaining with mankind, as well as supernatural gateways associated with mountains through which spirit beings have and can come. So suffice it to say that these ancient native ideas involving flying discs, flying creators, spirit guides, even owls and a talking dragon or a great serpent, and supernatural gateways tied to mountain ranges. This is something that began long before the Vatican cast its eyes on Mount Graham. Think how much these legends mirror what the Bible teaches, including the idea that mountaintops or high towers were often depicted as places where doorways into the supernatural could be opened. For instance, Nimrod of biblical fame sets out to build a tower whose top will reach into heaven, Genesis 11:4 says. This was the infamous Tower of Babel, and Nimrod was designing it so that the top of it would extend into Shamayim, heaven, the dwelling place of God. The Jewish Encyclopedia confirms several historical records that Nimrod, who it establishes was also identified by various ancient cultures as Osiris, Orion, Apollo, Gilgamesh, that he had built the Tower of Babel specifically to ascend into the presence of God, into the presence of Jehovah himself. And of course, God came down and said of the tower's design that nothing would be restrained from them, which they have imagined to do, Genesis 11:6. So in other words, according to the Lord himself, Nimrod would have accomplished what he imagined to do, and that is to build a tower whose top would reach into the abode of God. Even the name Babylon implies that, echoing the North and South American Indian beliefs about towering gateways and the meaning gate of God or gateway to God. Now, that there could be sacred locations where those beings that can see into the supernatural realm could literally walk onto a high place and enter heaven is really not as far-fetched as it sounds. There are numerous records, including in the Bible. that appear to substantiate the idea that heaven can be attained on high towers or mountainous locations. So think about Moses meeting with God on Sinai, Jesus returning atop the Mount of Olives, the 200 watchers that descended in the days of Jared on the summit of Mount Hermon, and other examples, including Jacob's ladder. There is something more supernatural on the drawing board at CERN than what is being admitted. Even Adam Barker of Tech Bubble wrote of CERN a while back that with the LHC, CERN are expecting to find other dimensions and open portals to these dimensions. If you have the image of Stargate in your head right now, you're spot on. That's what he said. And then he went on to draw parallels to the biblical story of Jacob's ladder. Perhaps you remember the dream that says, "Behold, there was a ladder set up on the earth, and the top of it reached to heaven. And behold, the angels of God were ascending and descending on it." Then Jacob wakes up from his sleep and he says, "Surely the Lord is in this place, and I did not know it." And he was afraid. And he says, "How awesome is this place? This is none other than the house of God, and this is the gate of heaven," Genesis 28. Now this ladder, described in the first book of the Bible, describes something like a portal from heaven to earth through which God's angels, interdimensional and spiritual beings from another reality, were traveling. When Jacob wakes up, he refers to the location as a gate, much like today's trendy terms gateway or Stargate. One of CERN's goals is to recreate Jacob's ladder, according to Barker, and to reopen a portal. Now, Sergio Bertolucci, who is the official director for research and scientific computing at CERN, he was asked a while back about this extra-dimensional doorway by the Register, which is a London and New York operated science and technology journal. And he didn't hesitate with an enlightening response. He said, "Yes, out of this door might come something, or we might send something through it." Now, prophecy in numerous parts of the Bible refer to a coming day when portals will be opened and spiritual entities are going to pass through and come to the earth. Now, if that's true, and if those verses are accepted for their literal meaning and not written off as some kind of poetic allegory, as some scholars have claimed, then the idea of CERN playing with gateways is a major concern.
This is Houston. Say again, please?
And if, as CERN claims, they're only out to explore space-time matter, particles, and the origin of our known universe and planets from exclusively a scientific or Darwinian-related perspective, if their agenda is unrelated to Bible prophecy entirely, then what is it with all this mystical symbolism that they knowingly are associating themselves with? Wouldn't it be more appropriate for them just to proudly display a polished statue of a particle or some artist depiction of the Big Bang instead of the statue of Shiva? For those who have not yet heard about this controversial piece of art that CERN proudly exhibits between buildings 39 and 40 near the main building of their operation, it stands as really the most visible and celebrated imagery behind their work, Shiva. This is the Hindu god of destruction. In 2004, the government of India, which has had a long-standing friendship with leaders behind the CERN project even before the completion of the Large Hadron Collider, they gifted CERN with this bronze work of an art depicting Shiva as Nataraja, the lord or sometimes king of the dance. This dance that Shiva performs in the sculpture is the one that provides the source of the creation cycle in Hindu mythology, the preservation of all life in existence and the termination of all life in existence. The Rudra Tandava is a dance that especially displays Shiva's sadistic personality as he rains down the ultimate destruction upon a weary planet. The plaque at the side beside the statue, however, reads in part, "Hundreds of years ago, Indian artists created visual images of dancing Shivas in a beautiful series of bronzes. In our time, physicists have used the most advanced technology to portray the patterns of the cosmic dance. The metaphor of the cosmic dance thus unifies ancient mythology, religious art, and modern physics." So right there out in the open for all to see is a direct correlation between the Hindu perception of Shiva hundreds of years ago, which is the concept of destroyer that I explained a moment ago, and our time, unifying, quote, ancient mythology, religious art, and modern physics.
Something is going on!
You think everything's a conspiracy?
Everything is.
Additionally, and perhaps even more important, there's a significant section of CERN that is built upon the Saint Genus Pueblo, which is a commune in Ain, a department of France. In Roman times, the Saint Genus Pueblo was called Apaliacum, but the town and a temple were dedicated there in ancient times to Apollyon, the destroyer, the Shiva Horus, if you will. Apollyon is also the angel of the bottomless pit, referred to in Revelation 9:11. And then there is a connection between CERN and the Gotthard Tunnel, the GBT, which is the world's deepest and longest tunnel system, consisting of two parallel passages, each moving in a single direction on a single track. The GBT passes directly beneath St. Gotthard's Pass, a strategic north-south corridor that connects northern and southern Switzerland. The connection to the Large Hadron Collider has to be made primarily because of the bizarre opening ceremony that was live streamed to the entire world on June 1, 2016, that included this highly occult, demonic dance with characterization, beginning with a call to unite the religions of the world by conducting an interfaith blessing of the tunnel beside a statue of St. Barbara, the patron saint of miners. Following the blessing at the statue of St. Barbara, the press, along with visiting dignitaries, also paid tribute to the 9 miners who had lost their lives during construction of the tunnel. Bodillo's southern portal provided the visiting dignitaries a disturbing parade, really, of miners, erotic dancers, zombies, fallen angels, all of whom were obeying the call of what they called the shepherd, whose yodels invoked the appearance of the event's infernal master of ceremonies, a goat man, portrayed by a young and energetic dancing male. This creature is shown with a Baphomet headdress, a goat demon's head, if you will, and a goat body costume with a hairy pelt. And then it had a formal tuxedo over the top. The imagery was heavily evocative of the German and Bavarian Christmas demon known as Krampus. Now, according to tradition, Krampus accompanies St. Nicholas on his midwinter rounds with the intent to steal boys and girls, putting them into a basket carried on his back, or he may decide to beat them with branches for being naughty. Maurice Bruce published a book on pre-Christian Alpine traditions in 1958, and he had this to say about the half-goat, half-demon entity. There seems to be little doubt as to the true identity, for in no other form is the full regalia of the horned god of the witches so well preserved. The birch, apart from its phallic significance, may have a connection with the initiation rites of certain witch covens, rites which entailed binding and scourging as a form of mock death. The chains could have been introduced in a Christian attempt to bind the devil, but again, they could be a remnant of pagan initiation rites. Many show the goat man in formal dress and a tuxedo-style cutaway formal coat and trousers, but with his usual horned goat face and always with his tongue extended. Now, this tongue out pose seems to be popular with ancient gods, whether they're Mayan, Hindu, Babylonian, Egyptian, Greek, or even British. For some reason, the coat of arms from the Prince of Wales supports both a lion and a unicorn with their tongues extended, for instance. More than likely, this tongue position represents sex magic, fornicating with fallen angels. The ancient symbol of the horned god, referenced by Maureen Bruce in the quote that I made a moment ago, it allows us to connect our goat demon from the opening ceremony at the GBT to CERN. Despite the fact that the Large Hadron Collider sits 3 to 4 hours down a twisty road from the location, the horned god's circular logic and passion for human depravity, Hernunos as is sometimes called, or Cernunnos, or the Green Man of British lore, simply had to make an appearance at this occult ceremony. Josh Peck and I and many other researchers have written extensively regarding the in-game plans for tunneling beneath the earth and smashing atoms to smithereens as nothing more than a thinly veiled attempt to open portals. But the opening ceremony at Gotthard made it clear that these portals are intended to do something else, and that is to release demonic entities. The twin tunnels of the Gotthard base tunnel commence with twin portals on a single track. These northward and southward journeys symbolize the death, birth, death cycle of the Green Man, who dies in the fall and winter and rises in the spring, summer. The tunnel ceremony was all about sex rites and rebirth, leading to a new world order that's a complete reversal of the Judeo-Christian design. This included the triple goddess and the horned god, along with human sacrifice and a return to pagan worship, all of which lie at the center of this nauseating ritual play, which you can probably still watch on YouTube. Dancers dressed as miners climbed this rock face, and they dug into the earth, so to speak, to unveil what was beneath the earth, a great machine formed from human arms that rotated and churned into various shapes and design, many of which resembled the Large Hadron Collider at CERN. Once this opening was achieved, the miners stripped off their orange jumpsuit attire and took up arms. That is, they used staves to perform a dance routine that looked like warfare. It was this forensic dance that aroused a giant. So clearly, the endeavor connected to CERN is far more than Switzerland's braggadocio about an engineering feat. The connection between CERN and ritualistic summoning of a sleeping giant, the horned god of Cernunnos, or even Melkart, both are types of the rising dying god, and Melkart slept for half the year, which may be why Elijah told the priests of Baal to call louder because he might be sleeping. Of course, I can only speculate, but I note the connection between Nimrod, Apollo, and Abaddon, Apollyon at CERN, and the history of the region are all highly curious. Apollo was worshipped by the Romans of that area, as well as the Greeks and in central France. Apollo was equated with the Celtic god Atep Omerus. These two characters were combined to create Apollo Atep Omerus, which can be translated as great horseman or possessing a great horse. In the Celtic belief, horses were closely related to the sun. The interesting thing to note is the connection between this idea of Apollo being associated with horses in France, where part of the LHC and CERN resides, and what the book of Revelation states about Abaddon, where it says, "And the shapes of the locusts were like unto horses prepared unto battle, and on their heads were as it were crowns like gold, and their faces were as the faces of men, and they had a king over them, which is the angel of the bottomless pit, whose name in the Hebrew tongue is Abaddon, but in the Greek tongue hath his name Apollyon." End quote. I also note that Revelation chapter 9, after describing how these devil worshippers will be judged during the Great Tribulation period, it ends in verse 21 saying, "Neither repented they of their murders, nor of their sorceries," which is the Greek pharmakia, "nor of their fornication, nor of their thefts." Now, pharmakia is the word that describes the ancient occultic effort to use mind-expanding drugs during rituals in order to open a doorway for making contact with unseen supernatural entities. So, given these descriptions, is it possible that CERN will have something to do with the opening of the bottomless pit described in Revelation 9?
The return of the gods is an event that is prophesied by every ancient religion on the face of the earth. They all talk about a time when the old ones return, when the ancient gods that once ruled this earth will return for the final age of mankind. A new golden age where mankind will be upgraded and changed into something else.
It's most important that each new generation born on Summerhour be made aware that here the old gods aren't dead.
Old gods on new streets.
Well, there's this certain time when these constellations are aligned. Open the gate and let the old gods, those are the demons, come through.
In this new golden age, the ancient gods will live among men, on the earth, in control of the earth, just like it was, known by Christians and Hebrews around the world as the days of Noah, and by the Atlantean Age, or the Golden Age, by everybody else. What you're about to see has never been seen by the public. As far as I know, this has never been played online. It's an old presentation by Dr. Thomas Horn laying out exactly what's about to happen. The quality of this video was very bad and the audio was very difficult to hear, so I remastered the audio and tried to clean up the visuals a bit because some of the information you're about to see has never been seen before.
Symbols are powerful. Did you know that? Especially to the occultists, symbols are very powerful. And that's what I want to talk to you about today. I want to talk to you about words and symbols. I want to talk to you about dates and all kinds of mysterious things like that. I want to qualify some of this in a moment. This is something for which I've been interviewed by U.S. congressmen, including Congressman Bob Ney, by U.S. senators, including U.S. Senator Rod Grams, by the History Channel, by dozens of radio and television shows, and even by members of the 33rd Degree Free Council themselves, and they have not refuted one time. I also believe that these forces can be powerful. Do you believe that we war against occultic forces? And do you believe that they also sometimes can be powerful? They can be persuasive. Timothy gives us that example where Moses withstood by the Egyptian magicians Jannes and Jambres. And Moses is sent by God to go and stand before Pharaoh, and he takes a rod with him. And he gives him miracles to support God's demand that he let his people go. And if he doesn't, this plague or that plague is going to happen. And yet here are these magicians in ancient Egypt who can mimic most of the miracles that are performed by God at the hand of Moses. They can be very powerful. We also learn in Revelation 13 that when the Antichrist and the beast appear, they will have the power to call fire down from out of heaven at their command. Occultic forces are in the world. They can be very powerful, and here is the mystery. They also seem to know something about times and dispensations, and that is quite a mystery. The example I give there is where Jesus went into the valley of Gadara. And the wild men of Gadara come running up out of the caves. These demoniacs come running out of the cave, and they say to Jesus, "What have we to do with thee, Jesus, thou Son of God? Art thou come hither to torment us before the time?" And this is the Greek word kairos, which means a fixed time, an epoch that is waited for. In our terminology, we would call it a dispensation. And for you pastors and preachers that are here, there is a fantastic sermon here waiting for you to preach it, because number one, they know something about times and dispensations. Secondly, they knew that that time had not yet arrived. But thirdly, they know when it does arrive, guess what? The King of Kings and the Lord of Glory is going to judge the dead and the living. He is the one that has the power. I could tell you a story of a demoniac that I don't have time to tell. It was the only case when I worked with a team of exorcists some decades ago, but it was the only case in which I ever saw actual laws of physics being broken, things that I simply could not understand. A young man running towards us and leapt through the air and hit an invisible wall, literally just slammed into something and hit the ground. But this was the cool part. The minute that happened, there were 40-some people who were standing there. Every single one of them fell to their knees and raised their hands. You know why? Because for the first time in their life, they saw undeniable proof that there is a God in heaven, and seated at his right hand is a man by the name of Jesus Christ, and every principality and power must bow before his authority. These powers know something about times and dispensations. All right, because of those points, they're in the world, they're powerful, they can be persuasive. They are warring to control what decisions that are made by pharaohs, by presidents. Egypt's Pharaoh is our president. They are warring for their mind. They want to control them. They want to take them somewhere. They want to take them, obviously, in a direction opposite of what God would have. Either that executive level or even the people of that nation follow. And slowly, the process of gradualism, the drip, 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 where over a slow period of time, we are taking away from preaching the Bible, Pastor Hoggard, that fantastic point you made last night. When you change the DNA, you change the body. And the body in this nation has been changed. The church is dying. We are no longer reaching 25-year-olds and younger have had their worldviews more shaped by Star Wars movies and George Lucas and Hollywood than they have by the church. And so they're persuasive, and that's what they're out to do. They're out to persuade a generation, but of what? And here is a great mystery. I was doing research on something else, and I came across this book. The Book of the Kumiel, the Council Book of the Yucatec Maya. This interested me because the Yucatec Maya had converted to Christianity following the Spanish invasion. And they still technically refer to their prophet as the Chilambalam, but the Chilambalam had converted to Christianity. And the Chilambalam started developing ideas around the Christian final judgment. And he came to believe that the prophets of his culture, who were forecasting a future in which their God would return, was a false setup for the Christ of Christianity and his appearing, and that something was going to precede it. In our theology, we would understand that entirely, wouldn't we? The coming of the Antichrist, a time of great deception. So I came across, this was academic research. The professor here, Richard Luxton, as far as I know, isn't a Christian. He had made himself a friend of the Yucatec Maya, and he was hoping that they would allow him to interpret some of their ancient books into the English language. And so he was doing academic research with the Yucatec Maya. The Maya had written this 500 years ago, and it contains prophecies concerning the future. So I started reading this. Make a long story short, I thought I found something. I thought I found something nobody had ever found before. And I'm not one of these guys, like in the New Testament where they're always running around trying to find some new thing. That's not me. But I thought I came across something, and it was connected to the year 1776, the year 2012. And more importantly, in my mind, it was connected to the founding of this country and the Great Seal of the United States, and a prophecy held by the Freemasons in which they believe that their God is going to return at a future moment in time. That grabbed my interest. But before I said anything about it, I thought, I have stumbled into some deep occult work here. And these guys are scheming something. And whether I believe it or not, they believe it. And because they believe it, it can affect the course of our nation. It can affect the course of law. When you get up among the elite, the power behind the power. The president stands up and gives a State of the Union address, but it's written by somebody else. And there are people behind him that are fashioning his words, like George Bush standing up and twice in his State of the Union referring to the angel in the whirlwind.
But because we hold beliefs beyond ourselves, when this spirit of citizenship is missing, no government program can replace it. When this spirit is present, do you not think an angel rides in the whirlwind and directs this storm? The story goes on, and an angel still rides in the whirlwind and directs this storm.
And a few weeks later, one of our senators standing before the U.S. Senate and praying to the angel in the whirlwind to take charge and control of the future of this nation. The angel in the whirlwind is known in Masonic circles. It is Enoch, basically, turned into the most powerful angel in heaven, which is very much central to their occultic and mystical beliefs. That's why I started out saying words are powerful. When people say words, most of the time, especially when it comes from DC on down, it means something. And it may mean something what they call sato, under voice. They're saying something to somebody else out there, but they think the public is going to receive those words as having a different meaning. It's occultic. And so I thought I found something. So here's what I did. Did you know that in the ancient Zohar, the 700-year-old Zohar, which is one of the most important books of Jewish mysticism, Kabbalah, magic, he said, did you know that besides, their commentary on the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Bible, that in a section called Viera section, which includes a subsection called Signs Heralding Mashiach, that is, the coming of the Messiah. And whenever he comes, they are going to accept a false Christ. Do you understand that? Why this was important to me was because what was ringing in the back of my mind was an even older prophecy, an 800-year-old prophecy that was also made by what I consider to be an occultic figure, a Catholic mystic. A man by the name of Malachi O'More Gare, also known more commonly to the Catholics as Father Malachi. And Father Malachi, 800 years ago, went to Rome to provide an update on his diocese to the Pope. And while he was there, something seized him, according to the story. Something came on him, and he began to write down what is now famously known as the Prophecy of the Popes, in which he listed every pope that would ever exist from the first to the last, beginning at Celestine II to what he called Petrus Romanus, Peter the Roman. But look at what he said about Peter the Roman. He'll arrive during a time of tribulation, and then the city of 7 hills will be destroyed, and the terrible judge will judge his people. So an 800-year-old Catholic saying almost exactly the same thing as 700-year-old Jewish mystics. They were prophesying the coming of their Messiah, who in our mind is the Antichrist. This guy is prophesying the last pope, the 112th pope. Well, guess what? Benedict XVI is the 111th pope. The very next pope, according to this prophecy, is Petrus Romanus. And last week, people were arrested who were plotting to assassinate the pope. At any moment, you could have the fulfillment of these pagan prophecies. Now, I don't put these on a par with the Bible, but why is this happening? Why did one culture, Jewish mystics, believe their Messiah would arrive, and a Catholic, and by the way, even some apocalyptic Catholics believe that the final pope will be the false prophet of apocalyptic literature, that the false prophet on this side will point the world's religious communities to the political figure on this side who is the Antichrist. And you're seeing the culmination of two, one 700 years old, one 800-year-old prophecies that are coming to pass at this very hour. Well, what happened then was a pattern for me began to emerge. And with my background in exorcism, this had special interest to me. I wondered, what are these spirits up to? What are they doing? What do they believe? Since spirits know something, both the good ones and the bad ones seem to know something about dispensations. What are they plotting? That's what this kind of started turning in my head, based on partly what I'll show you again in a moment from the book of the Kumiel. But so I decided, all right, I'm going to do a little bit of research. There's also a series called The Lost Symbol Found, which was when Dan Brown came out with his book, The Lost Symbol, talking about a Bible that is hidden in the base of the Washington Monument. We spent 6 hours explaining why there is a Bible that is bound in a stylized magic 666 square in the base of the Washington Monument, and what that mysticism means from their own Masonic writings. So in any case, something began emerging to me, and I was curious about it. I'm Curious George, I'm Curious Tom. That's me. Always been kind of a stinker as a little boy, and when somebody said don't go there, I went, oh, see what I just did? I cross. And don't think that I haven't been spanked by God plenty of times, so you don't need to come up and rebuke me. In any case, I thought a pattern was emerging, so I kept digging. I found Monument 6 in Tortuquero, Mexico. And Monument 6 tells us that when that moment arrives, their underworld god, Bolonyakteku, is going to return, followed by 9 support gods that represent the planets in our planetary system. And I don't know where Noah went, but Noah, it sounds just like they're describing an invasion of Earth, like a giant UFO, because all of a sudden something descends very rapidly upon the earth. Is that going to happen? I don't know, but I know that the Bible tells me men's hearts are going to fail them for fear for seeing those things that are coming upon the earth. And there is a time of great deception and a time of lying wonders that could cause the world to accept what? An intergalactic Messiah, the return of the gods, the return of the Sumerian gods, something that could be extraordinary, beyond our comprehension, that could cause the masses of the world to panic and fall down in subservience to what we think of as the coming of the Antichrist. Anyway, that's what Monument 6 says. So I started looking into other cultures. I wanted those. It just Mesoamerican. I found out that the Hindus had focused on the same thing in the Hindu Kali Yuga calendar. This is the age of the male demon, and they too saw that the earth would go through catastrophic changes. Then I found here in the early Americas, 200 years ago, the Cherokee Indian tribe, in a whole series of apocalyptic prophecies. They too began to prophesy the return of their feathered rattlesnake god. These are called the Cherokee Star Constellation prophecies, or more commonly the Cherokee rattlesnake prophecies. And here's another thing for you investigators that like looking into this stuff. I want somebody to answer me why all of these cultures want to typify their god as a great dragon that has the power of flight, has the power to move through the air. The Bible talks to me too about a power of the air, and also refers to him as a dragon. And all of these cultures, the Cherokee see a flying rattlesnake god who's going to return. The Mayans see Kukulkan. The Aztecs see Quetzalcoatl, their feathered serpent god coming back from the heavens. And furthermore, as you'll see in a moment, on the Great Seal of the United States, the prophecy on the Great Seal speaks of the return of the god Saturn's reign over the earth and his son Apollo upon the earth. And if you look at ancient depictions of Saturn, he is pulled in his chariot through the sky by 2 winged dragons. All of this occultism. So I went back to Luxton's book, this interpretation of a 500-year-old prophecy, the Book of the Kumiel. Now, let me just real quickly, because I really got some stuff here I want to be able to say, and so I'll move through this part quickly. The point that grabbed me in this was that the Maya had recognized a direct link between the number 13, which is so important to our country, 1776 and 2012, in cycles and illustrations in a way that academic Luxton thought mirrored prophecies of the Christian Last Judgment. They mirrored prophecies of the Christian Last Judgment because the Chilam Balam had become a convert of Christianity, and he was speculating about what does all this Mayan stuff mean to him now as a Christian. It is pointing towards the coming of a judgment that is defined in the scriptures, in which there is going to be a clash between the powers of paganism and the powers of God. When I read the Mayan translation by Luxton, here's what struck me. These elements. The final 13-step countdown of the Mayan calendar began in the year 1776, followed by 13 steps, ending with the return of their God. The minute that I read that, I said, that's describing the symbolism on the Great Seal, where in Roman numerals you have 1776, you have a 13-stepped uncapped pyramid, and numerous American historians have told us that those steps represent periods of time over which is this ominous eye of Apollo. known to the Egyptians as Osiris, known to the Sumerians as Gilgamesh, known in the Old Testament as Nimrod. And that too is verified by all of the best academic work of the Freemasons as well as American historians. That's not a disputable fact, and it's not Tom Horn's opinion. That's what that eye represents. Combined here with the statement Anuet Coeptus and the prophecy Novus Ordo Seclorum. I'll talk a little bit more about that in just a moment. So my first question was, were the framers of our government, and in particular those esoteric-minded gentlemen who were important to the design and layout of Washington, D.C., and iconic things such as the Great Seal of the United States. Now, don't get me wrong, there were Christians in the founding of our country, and especially at the common level, as a result of the Pilgrim movement. This was a Christian nation. This was a nation filled with Christians. But there were also among the leaders of this nation those who belonged to the secret orders. That too is a fact. And especially those who were responsible for the design and layout of Washington, D.C. As a matter of fact, you can go to our government's own website and read about the contest that was initiated for the design of Washington, D.C. and look at what our government records tell us about the different architectural firms who offered different kind of designs for Washington, D.C., and then read on our government website about how Thomas Jefferson didn't prefer any of them, rejected all of them. Why? Our records say because he wanted the U.S. Capitol to reflect the Roman pantheon, and it even says in our government records, dedicated to all pagan gods. That's what they wanted. So that's what they shepherded, and that's what they got, and that's why you have a dome and an obelisk, and if we have time, we'll talk about that's why D.C. is laid out the way it is. That's why these elements made it onto the Great Seal of the United States. Well, what I wanted to know is, were these same mystical-minded gentlemen, were they aware of the beliefs of the Maya and the beliefs of the Aztec? Were they aware of it? And if they were aware of it, did they incorporate it into their belief system? And especially, did they incorporate it into the symbolism of the Great Seal and other important elements of Washington, D.C.? That's what I wanted to know, because I thought if I could find concrete evidence that in fact they were aware of it, and in fact that they incorporated it into their belief system, it might raise my suspicion about the design on the Great Seal, right? So, to make a long story short, let me tell you a little story. There's a man by the name of Constantino Brumidi. Brumidi became the official government painter for Washington, but Brumidi cut his teeth in Rome, where he did work for the Vatican, where he restored frescoes in important ancient Catholic churches. Brumidi, when French occupied Rome, Brumidi migrated to the United States. He became a United States citizen. He immediately went to work for the Jesuits. Well, the Jesuits in New York City were considered to be the power base of Rome's interest in America at that point. They were very interested in making sure that they played a role here in early America. The Jesuits were here to do that. Well, Brumidi suspiciously left the Vatican, came here and went to work for the Jesuits in New York City. And in 1854, abruptly, the Jesuits and the Freemasons financed a trip for Constantino Brumidi, the famous Greek-Italian artist, to travel where? To Old Mexico. For what reason? To make copious notes of the Aztec calendar stone. Upon the completion of that task, he returned to Washington, D.C. He went immediately to Quartermaster General Montgomery C. Meigs in Washington, who was the supervisor over the construction of the dome and the wings of the dome. He was immediately commissioned to become the official U.S. government painter. He moved inside the halls and the rotunda. He began painting frescoes that are Freemason in design. They have very mystical and pagan important qualities to them towards the mystical beliefs, the metaphysical beliefs of the Freemasons. But ladies and gentlemen, of all things, if you were going to paint a frieze of American history, of the tens of thousands of things that you could have painted in the famous frieze of American history at the base inside the U.S. Capitol Dome, what does he paint? Nothing else but the Aztec calendar stone And there are so many important elements, by the way, in the frieze of American history that send secret messages back and forth to the Freemasons that we could spend 20 hours, I'm not joking, just going through these paintings and pointing out different things, such as Montezuma's hand gesturing down towards the sacred fire, which is encircled by that serpent that's going to return. Here's what some called an Aztec drum, but notice that it has the shape of a Maltese cross, which is the symbol that is connected in history to the empire of Osiris, Apollo, who began on Malta. The Maltese cross, of course, for those reasons, was important to the Knights of Malta, connected with Freemasonry, and the Vatican, where Brumidi began his work and found favor. But there's somebody hiding here in this image in your U.S. Capitol dome. He's hiding right back here behind this seated and standing Aztec figure. If you look at the stone of the sun, or the Aztec calendar stone, that as it might have originally appeared as it was painted, this little guy that's hiding in the U.S. Capitol dome with his tongue sticking out at the world is the god Tonatiuh. Tonatiuh is the god who demands human sacrifice. In fact, according to Spanish and Aztec records, more than 20,000 living human sacrifices per year had to be offered to Tonatiuh, who is going to demand the same on his return. In fact, in the year that they were celebrating the reconstructed temple of the sun god, the Aztecs, according to Spanish records, sacrificed over 80,000 humans that year. A constant line of human sacrifices being sacrificed. Were they unknowingly influenced by the occult power that seemed to be operating behind so many other ancient societies? Societies separated by time and distance. Some of them by hundreds of years, some of them by thousands of years. Some of them by hundreds of miles, some by thousands of miles. Cultures, most of whom we have no evidence that they had any ability to pass oral history one to each other, and yet all of them, for some reason, who worship these dragon gods, when their God will return and the earth will enter into a new age of elevated mankind. Most of them also, by the way, would speak in terms in their own mysticism, as I was talking about last night. We are heading towards a time where men are going to become demigods, according to the transhumanists, but they say the same thing in their own language. Man is going to be elevated. We're going to have a new golden age. The gods are going to return, and men with gods are going to be blended. It's all part of their prophecy. Is it part of the reason the designers of the Great Seal included so many prophetic symbols on the seal? And why put openly hidden prophecies on America's highest seal anyway? For those who are not aware of these prophecies, I don't have time to go into all of it. This is a statement. Anowet Coeptus, this was taken from Virgil's Aeneid, in which Ascanius, the son of Annius, from conquered Troy, prayed to Apollo's father, Jupiter, or Saturn, Zeus. Charles Thompson, the designer of the Great Seal's final version, condensed line 625 of Book 9 of Virgil's Aeneid, which reads, Jupiter omnipotus Adacibus Anowet Coeptus, or all-powerful Jupiter, favors the daring undertaking. He concised that to Anowet Coeptus. He approves our undertaking to conceal the true identity of the he of the Great Seal, the mythical father god Jupiter, who gives Apollo life. I'll bet you that the majority of the people sitting in this room, the women in their purses, the men in their wallets, or at least a very large number, have this prophecy in your wallet. It's on your U.S. $1 bill. Thanks to Roosevelt and Wallace, 32nd degree mystics who believed the prophecy on the Great Seal. This, according to Wallace's own records, was a prophecy about the coming of the great architect of the universe, also known as Osiris, also known as Apollo, also known in the Bible as Nimrod, and they believed that his coming was soon and that it would be heralded by a new breed of humanity. Now remember, their contemporary enemies out of Hitler had been hoping for the same thing, the Aryan supermen, the Ubermensch. We are going to create a new form of man. And they believed that prophecy was coming. Well, guess what? They were probably right. It is coming. And now our technology has caught up to our mystical dreams, and we are about to give birth to a new form of man. But did he hide this? Because when you look at your dollar and it says, in God we trust, who do you think that's talking about? Is that the God of the Bible? Well, you know, if you read, by the way, what caused the great push in America to get placed on our currency, the phrase "in God we trust," that's not really what they started out wanting. It was Christians. And they had actually said to Congress that in a hypothetical annihilation, this is their language, a hypothetical annihilation of the United States in the future, antiquaries of the future would have determined that America had been a pagan nation based on the symbols of the Great Seal and the way Washington, D.C. was laid out. Even the old-timers knew this. And they wanted something in our government that would reflect that widespread Christian view that was held among the mostly agrarian communities at that time. And it was opposed by the Freemasons. It was opposed by the President of the United States. They did not want something saying we are a Christian nation. And they finally compromised and put "in God we trust" because of the ambiguity related to that phrase, and that in some hypothetical annihilation of our country and somebody wanted to determine who is the God that's being talked about on the Bible, every symbol on our dollar would tell them it is Osiris. It is the ancient God, dying and resurrecting God. It is Apollo. It's he whose eye is hovering above the uncapped pyramid. That's exactly who you would determine this God was talking about. Well, here's the Novus Ordo Seclorum. That is a prophecy. It's taken from a prophetic line in Virgil's Eclogue 4, line 5, Magnus ab integro seclorum nascitur ordo. The interpretation of the original Latin being in the majestic role of circling centuries begins anew. If I have time, I'll explain that. That is a prophecy of the Cumae Sibyl, who predicts the arrival of, in the end times, of a divine son. But who was the Cumaean Sibyl? Well, she was the most important prophetess of Apollo. She is the most famous of the Pythians. A prophetess, a Pythian, by the way, is what the Apostle Paul cast a demon out of in the New Testament. When in Greece and Macedonia, and it says that the custom there was to go out in the morning and make prayers. You remember this story? And Paul and his entourage went out to make prayers, and every day the Bible says that a damsel, that is a young woman, possessed with a spirit of divination, would follow them around and say, "These men are from God, they've come to show us the way of salvation." Now, interesting question. Why would a demon-possessed prophetess of Apollo do that? For the same reason the New Age movement quotes from the Bible. By the way, whenever, I can tell you this, I know this from experience, whenever these spiritual forces know that they have come up against a power greater than they are, that's you, in Christ, and you're in their community, they won't try to defeat you. They'll try to make the community somehow think they're somehow joined to you. So, but you know why? You're a fisher of men. Well, believe me, they are too. They are fishers of men. These spirits are fishers of men. And so they will join or try to make the appearance of having joined in order to draw people away into mysticism. And it's happening right now. I've never seen a day in my life. Why do I talk about this kind of stuff? Why do I talk about UFOs? Why do I talk about what is the occultism operating behind the year 2012? Because I pastored for 25 years. I was an executive in one of the largest evangelical organizations in the world for a decade. And I have never seen a time where the world is asking more questions that the church is afraid to talk about. And the young people in their churches that are asking those questions are then going out and they're asking people that are part of the New Age movement. They want answers. And if you won't answer their questions, they're going to find an answer to their question. That's why this woman was following the Apostle Paul around in the hope that after they leave the community, they could pretend they too were some part of this great power and they could somehow build up and reinforce their position. And the Apostle Paul got sick of it and done what any good Baptist preacher would do. He cast the demon out of her in the name of Jesus Christ. And guess what? Came out the same hour. And yet for some mysterious reason, the Cumae Sibyl is in the Sistine Chapel at the Roman city, the Vatican City, and she is holding a position here of honor among the Old Testament prophets. Michelangelo, who made the famous paintings there in the Sistine Chapel, he left a secret behind that I've never heard anybody ever talk about. I'm going to show it to you right now so you can follow up on it on your own. But Haggerty left us something here very important. Count the digits on the left hand of the Cumae Sibyl. Now her thumb is inside the book just like it is on this finger. And then you count her digits, 1, 2, 3, 4, and the fifth one is bent under or cut off, which could have even more significant occultic meaning. She's a 6-digited prophetess. Wonder why Michelangelo did that, because that dates back to the Watchers. That dates back to the offspring of those rebel angels that rebelled against God. But it also directly connects to Apollo, who is known as Nimrod, and the fact that he probably was an offspring of the Watchers. If we get time, we won't have time probably, but if we get time, I'll show you in the Old Testament book of Genesis where it says, and Nimrod began to be. And the Hebrew word there is Gibborim. Nimrod began to become a Gibborim, an offspring of the Watchers. Well, anyway, there she is. And yet, this woman who is held in a sacred place of honor there at the Vatican City, what is it that her prophecy that's contained on the Great Seal of the United States of America, what does it say? Well, the divine son who comes of the Sibyl's prophecy is to be spawned of a new breed of men sent down from heaven, what we talked about last night, as he receives the life of God, since he's heroes with gods commingling. This is taken directly from Greek mythology, where there was a marriage of the gods and mankind giving birth to the demigods. This is Watcher technology. This is what we're going to do in our technology. Now, let me give it to you quickly. Here's the prophecy that's encoded on the Great Seal. Am I talking too fast? The Great Seal. Now, this is the prophecy that's on the Great Seal. Now, the last stage, by Kume Sibyl sung, has come and gone, and the majestic roll of circling centuries begins anew. That's where we take the phrase, a new order of the ages, the Novus Ordo Seclorum. Okay, what's going to happen when this new world order is born? Justice is going to return old Saturn's reign. Bible scholars will tell you this is talking about Satan. Saturn is the equivalent of Satan in biblical theology. Is going to return old Satan's reign with a new breed of men sent down from heaven. Only do thou at the boy's birth, in whom the iron shall cease, the golden race will arise. Befriend him, chaste Lucina, 'tis thine own Apollo reigns. So now we know who is prophesied on the Great Seal of the United States to return. This is from which the prophecy is taken. He shall receive the life of gods, and see heroes with gods commingling, and himself be seen of them. And with his father's worth, that is Saturn's worth, he will reign over the world. Assume thy greatness, for the time draws nigh, dear child of God, great progeny of Job, that is Jupiter or Zeus. See how it totters, the world's orbed might, earth and wide ocean, and the vault profound, all see enraptured of the coming time. All right, very quickly, there are a few elements here you need to understand. The Greeks believed in 4 ages, right? You remember this from school? There was the golden age. This was the age when the gods reigned upon the earth. After the gods departed, we entered into the silver age. This was the age of the demigods. This was when only those who had been born of the gods, what you would think of as the Nephilim, the Gibborim, the offspring of the Watchers, this is when they were upon the earth, the silver age. Then the flood came, wiped out most of those bloodlines of the gods, the Greeks believed. And then we entered into the bronze age. This is the age where there's still some elements of the bloodline of the gods on the earth, but not very much. And in Christian theology, we look at this and we say, well, you know, the flood wiped out the giants, and yet, lo and behold, how did this happen? After the flood, somehow, they're back. How did they come back? I believe there was a high level of technology that was used that's also going to be used in our age, but that's my theory. There's other kind of theories around this. J.R. Church talked about the bloodline of the Antichrist and the tribe of Dan. Other people tried to figure out, but bottom line is they came back. Somehow the giants were on the earth again, but not in the great numbers that they had been before. This is the Bronze Age, when there's very little of the divinity of the gods from the Greeks' point of view left in humanity. And then finally we enter into the Iron Age. That's the age that we are in now, where there is so little divinity left inside humanity. What do we got to do? We got to create a new breed of humanity. Exactly what the transhumanists are saying now, the mystics of old were saying the same thing. The day will come when we will need to rejuvenate, recalibrate, alter, re-engineer humanity so that once again we can be an offspring of the immortals. But why should Christians care? about a Sibyl's prophecy on the Great Seal heralding the return of Apollo, because the Bible identifies the god Apollo as the same spirit, verified by the same name, that will inhabit the political leader of the end times New World Order. 2 Thessalonians, let no man deceive you by any means, for that day shall not come except there come a falling away first, and that man of sin be revealed, the son of perdition. This is the Greek word Apollyon, which is the Greek's way of saying what we call Apollo. Apollia, Apollyon, Apollo. Revelation 17:8 ties the coming of the Antichrist with the return of Apollo. The beast that thou sawest was, and is not, and shall ascend out of the bottomless pit and go into perdition, Apollia, Apollo. And they that dwell on the earth shall wonder, whose names were not written in the book of life from the foundation of the world, when they behold the beast that was and is not and yet is. This phrase is held by many theologians who believe that it pointed to either a spirit or a personality that existed on the earth, was dead at the time or gone at the time of the writing of Revelation 17:8, but who will return in the latter days to either be or to possess the Antichrist. Both the Bible and ancient records and the prophecy on the Great Seal tell us it is Apollo. He is equivalent to the Egyptians as Osiris. In the Old Testament he is called Nimrod. If we had had time we would have talked about this question, but how could Apollo, Osiris, Nimrod possibly return in flesh or spirit as Antichrist? But it has to do with the Cumae Sibyl's prophecy of a new breed of men, and the same thing that I was talking about. Well, there it is, Genesis 10:8, and Cush begat Nimrod. He began to be, this is the Hebrew halal, which means either ritualistically, he began to change sexually or to change genetically, or it can flatly just refer to the same thing when the Bible refers to all flesh having become corrupted upon the earth. He began to change genetically, and as he did, what did he become? A mighty, a Gibborim in the earth. He immediately sets out to build a tower. His eyes were opened, like we talked about last night, to new modes of perception, what the transhumanists want. Suddenly he saw something. He wanted to build a tower whose top would reach into the heavens. Roosevelt and Wallace believed it. Here's Nicholas Roerich holding the sacred casket. Wallace was a devotee of Nicholas Roerich. I went to the house of the temple. I want to know if there was anything to this, so I went to the lion's den. I had people praying and fasting for me. I took my wife. We went to the house of the temple. We went to the headquarters of the Scottish Rite Freemasonry in Washington, D.C. on 16th Street, and not on a public tour. We went and met privately with 2 Freemasons of the 33rd degree order. They took us inside. They answered every question except one. I'm going to tell you what that question was. When we went into the sacred room there, the chapel, with its giant altar, and I looked up at the 36-paneled magic 666 square that is used during the raising ceremony to bring forth the spirit of Osiris from the underworld to incarnate him in every U.S. president. When I was standing there, I'm familiar with the raising ceremony. A 32nd degree Freemason becomes a 33rd degree. They go through this process of raising Osiris from the dead to be incarnated within that individual. But what I had been told was that ceremony was secretly conducted at the inauguration of every United States president, beginning posthumously with George Washington and extending through every U.S. president. And when I asked them if that was true, they would not answer that question. One guy got nervous and walked out of the room. The other one just stayed nervous and stood looking at me. And my wife gave me a look like, "Don't press it, buddy." I believe the greatest conspiracy of all time is sitting out in Washington, D.C. It's also here at the Vatican. This is the ancient structural representation of the womb of Isis. This is the ancient structural representation of the erect male phallus of Osiris. Your capital city is laid out as a magical construct based on ancient Egyptian beliefs for the exact purpose of raising Osiris from the dead so that he could be incarnated within every U.S. president. That's the way the city's laid out. It's also laid out that way at the Vatican. Did you know, Noah, that when Pope Sixtus went and they got this obelisk, they took it from the ancient city of Heliopolis, what is called in the Bible the city of On. It was dedicated to Osiris, Isis, and the sun god Ra. And when Sixtus the Pope brought brought it there, he tried to conduct an exorcism on it to cast the spirit of Osiris out of it before planting it in the center of the Vatican City. All right, there's a reason why the Washington Monument has a magic square in its base where a Bible is bound. There's a reason there's a magic 666 square above that altar in the house of the temple where I was at. There's a reason there are 72 pentagrams. In their Gnosticism, they believe 72 demons control the nations of the earth, and they have bound them at the base of the apotheosis of Washington. This is the underbelly of the U.S. Capitol Dome. It's called the apotheosis of George Washington, which means to become a god. What god did he become? Well, look at the heaven that he's rising into. There's not one Christian symbol. There's no Jesus. There's no cross. There is no Michael the Archangel. Every part of the underbelly of the U.S. Capitol Dome is filled with pagan gods. Here's the god Vulcan, whom Manly P. Hall tells us fills the Freemasons' hands with the seething energies of Lucifer. That's the heaven he went into. At his funeral, Freemasons cast sprigs of acacia upon his body to represent that he had gone into the underworld to take his role as Osiris so that the next president could become the resurrected Osiris. Well, the occult have a plan. God has a better one.
So what do you think about that presentation I just showed you? Because in my opinion, it's one of the most important presentations I've ever seen. So make sure you share this far and wide. Leave a comment and let us know what you think. Also, don't forget to hit that like button. And until next time, thank you all for watching. God bless you all.